Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So glad to have you all here. Before we begin, I'm just a little bit of housekeeping. In the chat, please tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm tuning in from sunny Lisbon in Portugal. I will present all of our speakers today, then they will give us a presentation. After that, we'll have some time for questions. So I encourage you all to use the Q&A button at any moment of their presentations. Anything that comes up, please share it with them, and we'll get to all of the answers in the end. And finally, I'm going to share a survey that will help us provide better content for you in the future. So now to the presentation of our panelists. Alexandra Talty is a Pulitzer Center Ocean Reporting Fellow. She is a multimedia journalist from Long Island, New York. Alexander Moore is a climate and health scientist and science communicator. He is the founder and executive director of ECHO, a Center for Climate Communications and Research, dedicated to promoting collaboration between journalists and scientists to combat climate and health misinformation. Georgios Hatz is the head of global communications and brand at Kpler, and Jean-Charles Gordon is the ship tracking director at Kpler. He is responsible for providing real-time and accurate vessel tracking data to clients in the shipping and commodity markets. So now I'll hand it over to our amazing panelists, starting with Alexandra. The floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you all for joining me here. So here we go. As mentioned, I am an ocean reporting fellow, and my project is investigating the American seaweed industry, which, if you're not familiar with, is a very new form of aquaculture in the US. So typical databases that usually track this kind of information are not
Augustine Kasambule to everyone. Hello from Congo, DRC.
Oh, hi. Thank you. So as mentioned, I am investigating the American seaweed industry, and it's a new form of aquaculture in the US, which is part of the point of this investigation is to try to understand better what is happening in this space. So the typical databases that would track this information federally, like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or the United States Department of Agriculture, or the US Army Corps of Engineering, do not track this production. And then the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, it does track, but it's not granular enough for these purposes. And this is an industry that 10 years ago did not exist in the US really to any extent. And in the past 4 years has bounced to nearly $500 million of investment, which, if you are an investigative reporter like myself, that is something that you want to dig into and understand more. It is an industry that is purportedly sustainable, so it's not necessarily that all of these people are bad actors, but if you are working on the oceans, you know that our impacts there have huge. We can have huge impacts on the ocean, and it's an incredible natural resource. So while it's a purportedly positive industry, it still is really important to understand these interplays, and especially when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars being invested. And then one of the other big issues that we knew from the outset is that many of the places with data are linked to funders of the seaweed industry, either through like universities or their seaweed nonprofits, which again doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad actors, but as a reporter, it does mean that you need to double and triple check this data. And I think that for anyone that is like working in the climate change space, I think we're all very much aware of the potential for greenwashing. So that was another thing that in the outset we knew we had to figure out other ways to kind of find data to tell these stories. And so how do we solve this? The Pulitzer Center way. Bring investigative journalism tools to the environmental reporting space. So the first idea, and one of the big parts of this project is to create a seaweed map of all the seaweed farms in the US. Again, this is an industry that is heavily invested in. It's eutrophic, which means there's no extra nutrients have to be added to grow seaweed. So it's, part of this blue carbon economy or blue food, which has a lot of positive benefits. But again, when we're talking about placing hundreds, if not thousands of farms into the open ocean, it's really important to know where these are going, how they will relate to wild kelp beds, or like potential impacts with other marine animals. So one of the big kind of tenets of this is to use Google satellite imagery to track the farms from space, which that I've used Google satellite imagery before in studying oceanography, but the idea of kind of combining GIS data with Google satellite imagery to see how these farms grow was one that the investigative team at Pulitzer Center came up with. Now, again, it would take a lot of time to get the GIS data and then use Google satellite imagery to track over time. So we're using that as kind of a fail-safe. So taking these buckets of data that are not kind of collated and then double checking them using imagery. The other idea that I came up with in my reporting was, so all ocean leases or all sea bottom leases go through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering. And so theoretically, that would mean that the federal U.S. Army Corps of Engineering has a collection of this data. Of course, as any reporters know, oftentimes when you find a solution to a problem, you then find another problem. So in this case, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, while they are the people that are permitting, they don't keep this all federally. So each kind of these coastal commissions has the data. Now, some are super friendly and get back to me and email. Some have maps already that I can use and it's super great. Some I've had to FOIA for, which if you are not familiar with reporting in the US, it's a great system we have where basically it's available to anyone, whether or not you're American, but basically if you have data that an American federal or state government institution has and they're not putting it publicly available, if you can make a case for why it should be publicly available, you basically write a letter and then they look through it. And we did have a training from Pulitzer Center on that, and there are a lot of great resources online. If you are not an American and you want information from American government sources, I'd really recommend that. In the case of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they actually list on their website like a letter that you can use, and you obviously fill in the individual pieces of information. But that is a great resource if you are doing any reporting around the US. And so in particular, what we wanted was to use the GIS seaweed farm data and then overlap that with marine protected areas listed on NOAA. And that's particularly of interest in Alaska, where there's been at least nearly 100 million in federal funding released to support mariculture in Alaska. And if you're familiar with it, it's a state that has a lot of natural resources. It also has a history of allowing natural resource exploitation to impact some of the wild resources that it has there. So for my project, it was really important to understand potential interplays with kelp farms and then existing kelp forests. And then lastly, so this was an idea that I came up with in one of our trainings with Communications Inc. And one thing that I think we have that can be a great tool, especially if you're working in the climate change space, is using data visualization. So every single story in this series that I'm doing is going to include some sort of data visualization of how climate change is impacting our ocean. I think that it's really important to tell the human side of how climate change is impacting our ocean, and tell stories of people who are—
And a buffet to everyone. Sorry for mixing the order. Alexandra, if you can please then pass it to Alexander, I appreciate it. Slightly smiling face.
Yes, sorry guys for that. Yes, I'll pass it to Alexandra. It's hard when two of your panelists have very similar names. So lastly, I'm planning to include an animation or data visualization of how climate change is impacting our ocean. And I think it's important for this project because seaweed farming is very much positioned as something that can save our ocean, is a new kind of agriculture that doesn't impact our our atmosphere the same way. It's a carbon negative, it pulls nitrogen out of the water column. And I just think that that's something that is really important to share also how our oceans are being impacted. And for the one of my series, I'm having an animated map of how increased ocean acidification is affecting the West Coast, which actually Alexander, who will be presenting next, he created for me. And he'll share a little bit more about how he does these amazing things with data. And then, so one of the other really big issues that we came across, and I'm sure anyone, again, who's in the climate change space or working on sustainability, you'll find this as well. There's a lack of transparency with a lot of corporate sustainability reports. And again, I don't think that everyone is necessarily bad actors, but right now we're in this situation where many multinational companies have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2035. Many of them are also not cutting their emissions. So as this time clock clicks closer, they are looking for more and more ways to sequester atmospheric carbon so that they can hit these goals. And many of them have created sustainability funds that have very little corporate oversight and don't require the same kinds of reporting that if they're a publicly traded company, that they would have to share with shareholders or with the public. One of the companies that I'm looking into is investing $1 billion in 4 years into any startup that can sequester carbon. And again, as an environmental investigative journalist, if you hear about $1 billion being invested in 4 years, that has a huge impact on space. And these companies are saying things like, we want to hack the ocean OS to pull down more carbon. And, I'm sure there's really great ways that we can reduce emissions or sequester more carbon, but the lack of oversight and transparency is something that I think is very, very scary. And so how do you get around that? So one of the first tools that we came up with was I took a course through the Pulitzer Center on Finance Uncovered training. They're based out of London. They're these really great financial journalists. And I kind of took the tools that you do for financial investigations and applied them to corporate sustainability reports. As mentioned, companies don't have to report as much in a corporate sustainability report. It oftentimes are things that they are sharing to make themselves look good, but it does give you an idea of where to look. And I think also, again, not that everyone is bad actors, but there is also a general lack of scientific information with these funds that I think if we were talking about $1 billion that was being dispersed to via a government, there'd be way, way more oversight. So the other tools that we used was searching the US Securities and Exchange Commission, EDGAR, which basically you can search the sustainability funds just by name, and then any kind of filings around them, if it's a US-based company, or if the sustainability fund has been set up in the US, it would show up there. You can also use UK.gov, which is another great resource. And then GuideStar, which one of my Pulitzer Center investigative team colleagues turned me on to. It basically, if a nonprofit is headquartered in the US, you can search them and you can look through all of their tax records. And again, it can show you things like staff salaries, as well as like how much funds they have, how much funds they're using. And, none of these things are necessarily smoking guns, but it does show you where to dig deeper and what kind of questions to ask. And then the kind of third bucket that has been difficult to get around is tracking international companies or people. We live in a global world, so oftentimes if I'm an American, so I'm going to be more predisposed to looking at American kind of resources. And additionally, just because I'm looking at the American seaweed industry, there's investments from Norway, there's it's really big industry in China, in the Philippines, in Mexico. So it's not enough to just be looking into your country or your realm, especially I think when we're talking about the ocean, it is something that it's a global resource, and a lot of these companies are set up that way. So Sayari was a phenomenal tool that we have access to. It scrapes worldwide data to show investors connections to other investors and companies, and then as well as links to offshore accounts. That opened up a whole thread of reporting for me that I probably could have gotten to on my own with Google searching, but instead of it taking like a month or months, it happened very, very quickly. And I think also it can really help you guard against your own kind of like national biases. And it really helped me in parts of the world that I'm less familiar with reporting. The other two resources that have been really helpful are Comtrade, which collates UN shipping data. That's a free resource. It doesn't always show the full picture because it's dependent on that data being reported to the UN, but it does show a lot of macro trends and can be really interesting to understand what's happening. And Panjiva tracks shipments to individual companies, which I was looking into companies that are like purportedly American and purportedly supporting American seaweed farmers, but are actually importing seaweed from abroad, which again is, that's a little bit of greenwashing, but the other kind of fear is that other countries may not have the same kind of food and safety standards. So those are the resources that we used for this. If you are an environmental journalist and you don't have a chance to get your question answered, feel free to reach out to me. My handle is at Alexandra underscore Talty on everything. And now I will pass it off to Alex. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
There we go. Thank you, Alexandra. And just for sake of clarity, I can just go by Alex, and that's easier. As Fernanda mentioned, I'm the director of ECHO, which nobody ever reads out because it's a huge NASA-like acronym, but it's a Center for Environment, Communications, Climate Change, Conservation, Health, and Oceans Research. And it's actually a network of a lot of people that are dedicated to this type of thing, this type of research. For journalists, we essentially offer resources such as climate and data sourcing, climate and ocean data sourcing, like Alexandra just mentioned, as well as visualization, analysis. And we also actually run climate communications fellowships for journalists and workshops that journalists run, and also provide a network of media trained scientists to answer your questions and give you a quote in a timely fashion, which I know is a frustration. The theme of today clearly is getting data from various sources and making it actionable and usable for your stories in journalism. That is one of the missions of ECHO, is to provide more support for journalists that are writing climate and ocean and health stories. So these are some of the products that we can provide, maps of all oil spills. This is from NOAA, all oil spills in the US. This clearly shows what, what the data in a very clunky CSV Excel sheet that you can download shows, but, actually visualize. This is the same for chemical spills. And, I'm just going to blow through these, but just to give you some eye candy on what's possible. In general, climate, ocean, fishery databases are imperfect, poorly funded, and organized by people who don't actually use the data, and they're myriad. They're usually built on frameworks made for commercial sales, not for data distribution. So if you go to any of these major agencies and try to download their data, it'll ask you to add it to a cart and then check out. It makes no sense whatsoever. Then you download these massive files that are disorganized, and you just don't know how to make heads or tails of it. that's what I can help with and what my colleagues can help with. These are some of the databases that you can use to obtain ocean data and climate data. I'm not going to click on each and every one of them because I only have 7 minutes, but this presentation will be available to you afterward. So just as an example, if you were to want to look for temperatures of ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic for the last 100 years or so, how would you go about doing that? You'd go to a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration database, and it looks like this, and you select your various types of data that you could use, and as you can see here under data type, climate forcing, climate reconstructions, etc. You kind of got to know what those words mean. It's not very hard. I can help. And then you download, and then you select a bounding box where you want the data to come from, in this case in the Western Atlantic, and then you will have some results. And when you click on the results, see Atlantic temperatures during the past 2,000 years, it'll give you all this study page with some files to download, and it's all kind of intimidating, but there's actually data there. If you click on the files, you'll get an Excel sheet that looks like this. You're still nowhere. You still don't have what you want for your story that's due tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. So the best you can do is really graph this, and it doesn't look like a whole lot. And so that's where Echo can help with animating and analyzing this data and making it pretty for your story. Another example is what Alexandra just mentioned. How do I find ocean acidification data for the last century for the entire world? Very complicated question. It turns out that's not even on the NOAA data set, so a database. So you can go on the web in scholarly databases, scientific databases, find the data, usually in an article like this, download it. If you click on the data availability, top bottom right, it'll give you a link, and it actually takes you to a NOAA atlas of all data from oceans for the last century, and it's massive, and you can't make heads or tails of it. In the end, what you want, as you can see here, where do I click? I have no idea. It takes a little bit of training to figure out how to do this. That's what scientists do. This is what I do on a daily basis. That's why. So in the end, it'll look something like this, where you actually have the entire ocean visualized, and the pH scale on the right, and how it has evolved over the last 100 years. So similarly, you want ocean temperatures on a map. How do I visualize it? Climate Reanalyzer is an awesome tool from the Climate Change Institute, University of Maine, where I'm affiliated as well. Here you can basically create temperature maps for anything you want, particularly ocean temperatures, but also any month, any season. In this case, I did 2023. And I gave it a standard climate anomaly correspondence, so that you can actually figure out what the temperature was, selected an area. This is super easy. You can learn how to use this in 2 minutes. I can teach you. And it creates awesome maps. This is the Arctic. And you're free to use this in your stories right away. No questions asked. So if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to help, and I'm happy to answer your questions. And it might involve co-authorship, and sometimes simply because of the effort that it requires. The coin of the realm and academia is authorship of things, but and newspapers, news articles work. But in general, I'm very happy to connect to the right people to figure these things out. And there you go. That was 7 minutes. And I'll give the floor now to Georgios. There you go.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Georgios Hatzimanolis. Everyone calls me Hats, which makes things a lot easier. So I'm the head of comms and brand at Kpler, and my team handles media relations for both of our brands, which is Kpler and MarineTraffic. What do? We handle all the inbound requests from journalists, which are quite literally hundreds a day. And then we also proactively work with journalists to help them with stories. So I'm going to come at this presentation a little bit different to Alexandra and Alexander. Not so much resources, but more some tips and then some use cases that we've worked with. And then I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Jean-Charles, who is going to go more into the tools that MarineTraffic has for journalists to use, which I'm sure will be a lot more exciting than my part. So for those of you that don't know, Kpler offers a full view of the global commodity supply chain. We track commodities, maritime, and energy. But as we're talking about ocean data today, I'll try and focus more on marine traffic in the second part with the use cases. MarineTraffic and Kpler are currently doing, and this is not a brag, it's just to give you an example of how much our data is being used. We're currently doing approximately 3,500 to 4,000 media mentions a month per brand, which is quite phenomenal. And I think a lot of that what it shows you is that more and more journalists are using data to tell stories, and that it's really important that you do so as well, because it obviously it helps bring about transparency and balance to your storytelling. So from me, first off, some tips about using data in journalism. And I'm sure there are a lot of experienced journalists here and some that are more on the younger scale, but so please don't assume that I'm telling you how to do your job, but I see all sorts of weird and wonderful things every day with the hundreds of requests we get. So here are some tips from a data provider that will make your life easier. So number one, define your story. You really need to know what is the narrative you wish to pursue, and a well-defined story is going to help you communicate with the data provider much better. I often get questions like, I'm working on this story, I don't know what kind of data I'm looking for, but I was told to come to you. Very little I can do to help you with that kind of a question. Whereas if you come to me and you say, I need to know all container, what are the waiting times at anchorage for container ships at the Port of Los Angeles, so because you might be working on a story of the environmental impact that container ships are having around certain ports, then that's very easy for me to get that data to you and turn it around quickly. So if your story is due at 4 a.m., you're more than likely to get the data from us than not. Number two, identify relevant data sources. I know this sounds kind of simple and easy, but again, we get all kinds of requests and quite often we do not have that type of data. So before you reach out, make sure that the person you're reaching out to or the organization does provide that data. Number three, evaluate data quality, very important. I'm fortunate enough to work for Kpler that has Kpler and MarineTraffic, and we are in both commodities and maritime, if not the most, then definitely one of the most trusted sources for maritime data. That's because we've built an incredible network of AIS station receivers over the years, and we go to great lengths to ensure that the quality of our data is the highest. So make sure that the data you are using is of high quality. And also, if you're going to speak to analysts, which I should have mentioned in the beginning, Kpler has great analysts. So, it's not just data that we provide, but we can offer you insights from our analysts. Make sure that, again, they're an authority because, having an analyst who has some authority in their industry is going to carry weight for your story as well. It's important to remember that rather than just using, anyone. Number four, this is like journalism 101. Obviously, verify your data, cross-verify. Don't just use one provider. A lot of people, when they're working at speed to get a story out by 4 a.m., they're going to one provider, they're getting the data, and then they're not cross-checking it. And sometimes there are errors. Even the best make mistakes. And so you do not want to be the person that used data and there was an error in it and, your story is wrong. So make sure you cross-check your data. That's pretty much it from my quick tips from the data provider side. Happy to take some questions later. I'll move over to some use cases that we've done recently. So you should know by now about the Red Sea situation and Houthi attacks, which is causing a disruption to shipping and the supply chain. As we track vessels, and I'm not going to get into too much about how exactly we'll do that because I want to leave that to Jean-Charles later. We were able to track vessels diverting away from the Red Sea to avoid the attacks and see how the supply chain has been impacted. That's what you can see on the screen here. This is the BBC using probably our most famous tool, which is the Fast Track and Playback feature, where you can visualize the movement of vessels. And they're using that on a news item right there. It was also used in the Financial Times and probably about 300 or 400 other news organizations and has been over the past couple of months. It's a really cool tool to use and helps you visualize the data, which is very important. When you're telling stories, it's not just about including the data in your story. You have to find a way to visualize it, which is why what Alexandra said earlier is so important. So make sure you make use of that. Number two, really important story in terms of environment is illegal fishing. This is a huge story happening everywhere in the world right now. So in particular, the Chinese are sending these giant fleets of fishing boats all over the world, West Africa, in the Pacific off the coast of Peru, in the Pacific around the Cook Islands and some of the other islands there, and harming regional fish stocks and supplies, which is obviously impacting then local communities. And by utilizing AIS technology, which is what MarineTraffic does, you can detect and report on illegal fishing activities, and you can go through pattern analysis and uncover operations in protected zones or exclusive economic zones. And this is really an important tool to use when talking about illegal fishing. I'm getting through this as quickly to try and meet the 7-minute thing myself. So I'm sure many of you remember last year's Titan submersible story, which was a tragic incident. So a lot of news organizations came to us because we were able to track the rescue operations vessels. This is one of those, as you can see in the Wall Street Journal. It was actually a video. This is just a screen grab where they tracked all the rescue operations going to the site of the accident and helping with the rescue operations. This one is one of my favorites. It's not an environmental one, but I absolutely love this story. So the New York Times visual investigations team, who are amazing at what they do, came to us and said, we have some information that the leader of North Korea is smuggling in Mercedes-Benz for his use, even though he's not allowed to. And can you help us prove this? And we have the name of one vessel. So we were able to find that vessel, but that vessel very cleverly switched off their AIS before getting near enough to North Korea so as to not to be detected. But our friends at NYT used Planet Labs and imagery to follow the vessel where the AIS was switched off. A lot of journalists are obviously doing this, and the ability to use different tools is very important in journalism. So you could use AIS to track the vessel up to a certain point, and then if it switches off, use other ways of detecting it. This was a great story. I really loved working on this one with the team. Another one, which I don't have a slide for, is Arctic shipping, very important for the environment. So as polar ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up in the Arctic, and more vessels are traveling through there because it's a shorter route basically, and they're saving money. But what it is by traveling through there, they're kind of forcing the ice to melt faster, which is just making a bigger problem. So again, a really important story in terms of environment to tell, and we are able to provide data on the vessels traveling through there. And I think this is one that's just going to become more and more important as we go along. Just finally, we've also done stuff on migrants, which again is very important in terms of sea and the human cost and the loss of life at sea. We've done stuff on the dark fleet and sanctions. We at Kpler really appreciate the work that journalists do, and that's why we provide our data to them for free. And we're very quick to turn around data requests. A few tips on that: get to know the people that you're working with, develop a really strong relationship with them. Because I can tell you, if I have two journalists coming and asking for huge data sets, the person that is friendlier and nicer, and I know is probably going to get priority, and that's just a fact. So be nice to them, and as I said earlier, know what you're asking about. That's very, very important. Yeah, that's it. I'll pass over to Jean-Charles now, because I'm sure he has more exciting stuff to tell you about all the tools that you can use. But just in closing, maritime data that both MarineTraffic and Kpler have, offers a wealth of opportunities for ocean journalism. So, harness it, make use of it, and I'm really looking forward to reading more stories from more of you on the ocean and the seas and the environment, utilizing our data. So, Jean-Charles, over to you.
I'm sorry.
You're muted, Jean-Charles. Jean-Charles, you're muted. Or your sound isn't working.
Maybe if you could try a headphone.
Or just select the correct microphone next to the microphone, arrow up. There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So yeah, hi, my name's Jean-Charles. I go by JC. I'm the ship tracking director for Kpler. I look after all of our maritime focused products, that is software as a service and data as a service. And as Hatz mentioned, we provide access to the community working on these stories and investigative journalism as we work across the world to support your storytelling. So what I'll do today is just take you through a couple of the tools that we have at disposal, and just show you what these look like. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully this works. I think the host needs to enable screen sharing, if that's okay. There we go. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Share. Can you all see this? Yeah, all good. All right, great. So this is MarineTraffic, MarineTraffic.com, which essentially tracks all vessels transmitting on AIS. AIS is the automatic identification system that all vessels are mandated to transmit for safety of life at sea. And these vessels over a certain size need to be transmitting their positions. And so we capture this with a global radio network around the world. We have over 6,000 AIS stations along coastlines, riverways, and then we also work with satellite AIS providers as well to cover the open ocean, as well as a brand new sort of roaming network that also captures AIS positions around other vessels. So essentially we have lots of antennas capturing all these radio signals, and we can essentially track these minute by minute as they operate. On any given day, we track around 400,000 vessels, and these vessels are transmitting in continuous fashion, and we track different vessel types. So if I show you here on the right-hand panel, you have some filters for your map. You can see the various different vessel types that you would like to view. So if you're only interested in, let's say, container vessels, you can do that right here. And this will show you the container ships on the map right now. And as you can see, there are only a few within the Red Sea at the moment, with the majority of going around South Africa. So this is a very simple way to sort of drill down into the data a little further. What you also have when looking at this global picture of maritime traffic and trade is more details on the actual vessel itself. So any random vessel, you can click on here. You can get more information about where it's been. So in this case, Murmansk port, and where it's going, Vila do Conde port in Brazil, the time of departure of this vessel, and the estimated time of arrival of this vessel. And so you can start digging into more details around this. You can click on vessel details and get a bigger picture in terms of this vessel's characteristics being transmitted via AIS. You can also get a look at the vessel pictures from our global ship spotter community. The ship spotting community is a very important community to us. They provide us with amazing quality, high definition photography of all of our vessels. So when you want to do a bit more investigation as when a vessel may change ownership, may change the sort of colors and logos it has on board, you can have a look at our photos database. And as you can see, we have a global community of ship spotters who take these pictures every single day and upload them to our platform, where we have a team that vet these pictures and make sure that they are associated to the right vessel identity. So that's a little bit about vessel details and photography. We're also looking at, you can kind of see where the latest port calls have been. You can dive into the last year, or you can go further back as well. We have data going back decades. You can also look at more around the vessel characteristics, former names, if there was a name change, what this vessel was called beforehand, what flag was it registered to before, and that date of change. We also have a brand new ownership database where we're looking at vessel management structures. And I believe one of the presentations beforehand was talking about using, for example, Sayari to uncover ultimate beneficial ownership. So this kind of information can be useful to you as well. And so that's a little bit about the vessel details element. Now you can also look at past tracks and identify patterns of life or patterns of trade. So when you're looking at a particular vessel in time, oops, sorry, let me just switch to this one. When you're looking at a particular vessel or area of the world, you can also use this playback feature that we were talking about just earlier, where you can essentially see how operations happen at port. This is looking at, I believe, one of the Jebel Ali container terminals and Dubai. You can see operations as they happen with tug vessels, moving container ships around, and how these navigate waters. You can also overlay nautical charts to essentially verify if vessels are respecting various transport corridors. This can be important for stories around insurance claims and casualties at sea. You can overlay all this information there with nautical charts to see if these perimeters were and boundaries were respected, for example. So there's a wealth of information that you can essentially overlay and use within your stories here. And all of this information is also available via data extracts. If you require specific data in CSV file, for example, or even APIs, you're able to request that from us, and we're very happy to provide that information to you for your stories. So that's a little bit about MarineTraffic and seeing the global maritime picture. So now I can take you to our other product called Kpler and our Kpler terminal. And Kpler looks at a subset of the global vessel population and looks at cargo carrying vessels. So these are mainly liquids and dry bulk vessels. And what we do is, based off of the information we collect from various sources around the world, including the market, brokers, various customer sources as well, we collect and piece together data around trade and cargo. So right now I've just pulled up this vessel called the NS Leader. NS Leader was recently sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Asset Control in the US. And NS Leader was sanctioned due to essentially carrying out sanctioned trades via Russian oil. And what you can see here on the right-hand panel are the voyages associated to NS Leader. And if you can see here, we have some information around what the vessel was carrying and in what quantity. So in this case, Russian crude oil under the tag Urals was carried from Primorsk to Jamnagar refinery between October and November. You can also see on the trades tab examples of who the buyers and sellers of this cargo were, the dates, the quantity, and where the source came from. So whether it's a market source, algorithmic source when it's predictive. So there is more information there where you can dig in and understand the major players and who's moving sanctioned cargo around the world, for example. We also have a brand new compliance tab, which we're working on developing right now with our customers on specifically to monitor sanction activity. So when you click on this compliance tab, you'll be able to see some sanction risks, management risks, operational risks, and any flag risks associated to the vessel. What we're looking at here is the NS leader. So this vessel is currently sanctioned under OFAC. When you click on here, it will actually take you to the official OFAC listing of this vessel. As you can see here, NS leader linked to the NS Leader Shipping Incorporated company. Now, when you go back onto the platform, you can also quickly see who the classification society is, who the protection and indemnity club is in terms of insurance. So there's more information there and more coming as well in terms of operational risks. For example, you have AIS gaps or sanctioned ship-to-ship transfers, AIS spoofing. So essentially when a vessel is transmitting a position that is not actually there, so masquerading its operations, for example, we will be detecting those as well. So that's a little rundown in terms of our existing two products, MarineTraffic and Kpler, and how these can help you achieve various objectives in your reporting. A big piece of the work that we really focus on here is data quality and piecing together all these multiple sources around the world to get you the information in a concise and cleaned out format so that you can focus on your story writing and ensure that you have the accurate data there to support your work. So yeah, thank you very much, and ready to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. That was great. Learned a lot in these 40 minutes. The first question is going to Alexandra, and it's about the planning and the execution of your stories. When you're doing a story or an investigative series, are you first guided by the data and then the reporting plan comes? Or are you first guided by the idea and then execute the reporting plan? If you could walk us a bit through that.
That's a great question. I would say I've been reporting on seaweeds in various ways since 2021. And I've always thought that there was a big gap between what is what is being purported of the industry and where investments are, and then what I hear from maritime coastal communities in terms of actual money that can be earned for people working in this field. So I think for me with this subject, it was kind of whenever I see a gap in that kind of a way, I find that very interesting. And then finding data to support that interest. I would say that's one thing, focusing on the data in the beginning with this investigation has been really, really helpful. And I think I think sometimes we want to tell stories as journalists, and sometimes you're more attracted to interviewing people or to getting into the weeds. But I think having the data guide you really is a great way to go about your reporting.
Great, thank you. Another question is coming for Alexander, and among all of the platforms that you showed that will be emailed to all of you so you can check it in your own time, is there one that you access more that kind of guides you day to day, that you really keep watching it whenever you can?
I use the NOAA paleoclimate database often, simply because it's the largest one and it's fairly well organized. Most of the other databases are really clunky. Scientists in general, I did not mention this during the presentation, but scientists in general don't really want to share their data. it's only a recent development that we have to make our data available with every publication. It was mind-blowing to me because I've always shared my data with every publication, but it was mind-blowing to me to discover this years and years ago, that that data is just not available. So the NOAA paleoclimate database does provide access, whereas most other databases generally just send you down a rabbit hole into a dead end. So that would be it. Also, I use Climate Reanalyzer every day.
Great, thank you. Another coming in for Alexandra. Besides the FOIA part of your investigation, have you had any other obstacles in terms of data, and how did you overcome these?
Yeah, tracking the investments into the industry has been really tricky. You know, for publicly disclosed deals, that's been like, if it's either, you know, sent out on a press release, obviously that I can track. There's this one database, Ficonomy, that is tracking private investment into the seaweed industry, and it scrapes the internet for that. So if you are reporting on macroalgae, I recommend Ficonomy. But the federal investment has actually been kind of tricky. I found there'll be like a press release and it'll list out like a big bucket of money, but it won't say how the projects are being awarded or who exactly is getting it. So I think with all of this, that's why I would say definitely focus on the data, because sometimes the more time you spend with it, you'll kind of see where your holes are, and then you can kind of see how you can patch that, and maybe rely on sources for some of it that you aren't able to get.
Nice, thank you. This question is coming from Miriam, and it's directed at the Kpler team. They want to know that we saw huge amounts of data here. We saw data, we saw platforms, and they feel that it seems like journalism is underutilizing data. So what do you think are the topics that journalism should cover more deeply using ocean data?
I'll take this one on if JC has anything to add afterwards. I wouldn't say that, I mean, they're underutilizing, you know, given that we have so much data, sure, but there is an increasing use of maritime data by journalists. More and more are using it, so which is positive. I don't know if there's like certain stories that are not being covered enough. The only one that I really think needs to be covered more is illegal fishing. Like there's definitely not enough being spoken about that, because it's having huge environmental impacts and impacts on local communities. I mean, some of the islands in the Pacific are tiny. So, you know, vessels showing up and taking 90% of their fish stock in one season, you know, is going to cause tremendous problems to those communities. In addition, you know, some of these fishing vessels are leaving China, and they're not going back, like they're not traveling back to China for years on end. So there's also a humanitarian story about it. Like, can you imagine working on a vessel, you know, for an incredible amount of time, not being able to see your family under very, very difficult conditions? So I think illegal fishing is definitely the one that stands out for me. But as I said earlier, Arctic shipping is, you know, is something that has to be tracked. And then I think journalists, and I know it's touchy, it's a touchy subject, and I know it's hard to get it published, you know, depending on who you're pitching to, but trying to find the links between global trade and the impact that it's having in certain areas. I think these are important stories that need to be told. JC, not sure if you have anything further to add.
Yeah, I align with that. And I think what's interesting here is that the information that we have is, of course, global and across all vessel types and across all sources. So whether you're looking into illegal fishing stories or sanctioned cargo trades, or essentially port operations, port congestion, all that information is available via our platform. So yeah, please reach out, and we'll be very happy to support you in these endeavors.
Thank you. And I saw that, Alexandra, you raised your hand. Would you like to contribute an answer?
Oh,
to
no, I didn't. I was trying to use the emoji to say, yes, I totally agree with Georgios. That's absolutely right. And I think also, I think it's what's underreported because it's very difficult to track is how much pollution these massive vessels produce, not only in terms of greenhouse gases, but also in terms of black carbon and dust, which, if you've ever been on one of these massive vessels, you'll see that just the plume of black smoke is unlike anything else. And if they operate anywhere close to glaciers or ice shelves, all of that deposits on ice shelves, and it makes a difference in how fast those ice shelves melt. So diesel is not emission-free as it's often touted to be. Even in a recent book on diesel that says it's emission-free. It's actually one of the worst things for the climate.
And Alexander, I know that you have a hard stop in 3 minutes. So one last question for you before you go. In rainforest reporting, we see a lot of people creating their own databases, right? Sometimes they can't really find the data they're looking for. So they partner with researchers or with organizations to create their own specific to the case that they're reporting on. How do you see that relationship develop into ocean issues? Do you think that there's space for that? How would that collaboration go forward, in your opinion?
Sure. I think that, my entire career, my entire work is dedicated to improving that connection between journalists and scientists. I don't get up in the morning unless I think that what I'm doing is eventually going to make a difference. And to make a difference, people have to read it. And the journalists are our best friends in that. So I think there should be a lot more of what we're doing right now. And that's what I dedicate my work to. And so, some scientists, as Alexandra really knows well, because she's been one of the ECHO fellows. Some scientists are trained to work with journalists in creating those databases. And some scientists simply just don't see the point or don't know how to start. They speak in a completely different language, and they just won't take the time or effort to do what Jean-Charles and Georgios are so good at. So it really depends. I try to connect journalists to scientists who are able to do that. I think it's the data is out there. It's messy. It's not clean. And, before you actually can get that data into a New York Times piece, like the many that have been shown here, you really need a lot of manipulation. And data scientists, scientists like me are good at that. But we're not, I think in general, as a class, we're not great at visualizing. So you really need the medial eye for visualizing, and Kpler is so good at it. MarineTraffic, I use it as a sailor. It's like this amazing tool. But you look at any climate data, climate reanalyzer is a huge exception. All the other tools are impenetrable to a normal human being. So we need to create more tools like that, and that's what I'm working on. I'm happy to partner with Pulitzer, and I'm happy to partner with anybody who's online to help with that. And with that, I gotta leave. I'm sorry. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
I think we can go for 5 more minutes. Yeah, great. There's a question for the Kpler team addressing how should we be suspicious of data? So how can journalists kind of check data validity or errors, or what are the red flags that journalists should be aware of?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's a very good question, and you should always be scrutinizing your data sources. Even though we shout, that our data is of excellent quality, and we have a data quality program behind behind the data that we surface. We have teams of data analysts and data scientists normalizing and cleansing the data. And so when we provide that on the platform, we are expecting it to be of high quality, but there are always mistakes in the data. Of the vast amounts of data sources that we capture and collect, we see many errors, many inconsistencies. So whether it's us capturing that data and cleaning it for you, or you capturing the data elsewhere and from different sources, online versus paid sources versus other sources, always have a reference point that you can check back to. It's good to compare sources and understand where the discrepancies lie. And then also it's a good way to communicate back to, for example, ourselves. If you do find discrepancies in the information, please do highlight that there are some discrepancies you found, and we're very happy to take that feedback on board and clean the data if it is erroneous. But yeah, I would say, no data provider is perfect, no data source is perfect. So when you have garbage in equals garbage out, and we want to try and ensure that the garbage in piece is as minute as possible.
Thank you. This one is for Alexandra, and it's asking about what satellite program do you use normally?
So the one that I've been using the most, and Kang from the Investigation Center at Pulitzer Center really loves it. It's Google Earth satellite imagery. So if you know what you're looking for and you can have like different times on it, it can really show a lot. You can get really close, you can see things change in terms of seaweed farms. Like I'm looking for canopy and then trying to decide how much, like knowing how big that canopy is and then understanding what that means. The other kind of sources, there's really cool, there's some NASA satellites that you can tap into. And then I didn't mention this, but I know that NOAA also has some really interesting buoy data that is real-time reporting that can be used for if you're doing anything with plastics, as well as like any kind of more specific data on ocean currents or ocean warming. And yeah. But Google Earth, you can do a lot with it. I think it's an overlooked data source.
And sometimes the way is to go simple, right? We get a lot of very flashy trends, but sometimes the simple works. This one is for the Kpler team, and it's asking within the Kpler platform if you can add vessel filters. So if you can look at more than one different types of vessel at the same time, how does that work?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yes, you can, and you can also create your own fleet of vessels if you wish as well. Maybe I can show you how that looks like. But very quickly, I know we're running out of time. Let's have a look. Here we go. Let me share that. So you can visualize all vessels. You can also showcase, for example, only certain vessel types like cargo vessels or tanker vessels. You can overlay purely fishing vessels if you want, and cargo, if that's of interest. So you can start to see how you can filter that through. You can then even drill down into the various sub-vessel types of each of these, and you can have any one of those in there. You can also add specific vessels if you're following a particular fleet, a particular fleet of vessels under a particular owner, for example, or you're writing a story about vessels that are working together or interconnected. You can click on a particular vessel, and then you can add that to a fleet. And then in your fleets, you can go here within my fleets and then just see the various fleets that you have here under the fleets view. And then you can only see your fleet, for example. So that's another way of doing it. So yeah, that was a quick answer to that question. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much. I think we covered all of the questions in our Q&A button. And I would like to thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Thank you for the time and for the knowledge shared. And to everybody who joined us today. Again, just a reminder that I will be sharing everybody's presentations. I will also be sharing a recording of this conversation, which will be on YouTube. And I invite you all from the audience to participate in our survey and share with us the main takeaways that you got from this conversation. You can suggest future content for us as well, things that you're curious about, ocean reporting and ocean data. So again, thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.